Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Octane Origins, where today we dive into one of the most fascinating and divisive machines in modern sport bike history, the Ducati 999. This isn't just a motorcycle. It's a story about bold design, broken traditions, heated debates, and eventually a surprising redemption. In the early 2000s, Ducati was riding high on the legacy of its 916 and 998 superbikes, bikes so adored they were practically rolling sculptures. So when the 999 arrived, angular and stripped of the classic curves, it felt like a thunderclap. Fans asked, how could Ducati replace such icons with something so radically different? Critics praised its engineering brilliance, its adjustability, and its ability to dominate on the track. But riders often judged it first by sight, not by stopwatch. That clash between performance and perception is the heartbeat of this story. Over the next stretch, we'll uncover how the 999 came to be, what forces shaped its existence, and why it became a lightning rod for Ducati enthusiasts. We'll look at the cultural storm that surrounded its launch, the engineering details that made it more than just a styling exercise, and the legacy it has earned today as both a misunderstood machine and a collector's sleeper. Along the way, you'll hear about the bold vision of designer Pierre Terblanche, the triumphs and heartbreaks of Ducati's racing department, and the voices of fans who loved and hated it in equal measure. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a journey into how passion, identity, and heritage collide with progress. By the end, you'll see why the Ducati 999 matters not only as a motorcycle, but as a symbol of risk-taking in the motorcycle world. So settle in, automotive enthusiast, because this ride is going to be as sharp and intriguing as the lines of the bike itself. Let's begin where every great Ducati story starts, with a legacy that seemed untouchable, and the daring decision to change it. To understand why the Ducati 999 became such a flashpoint, we have to rewind to the extraordinary shadow it stepped into. The Ducati 916, launched in the mid-1990s, wasn't just another superbike. It was hailed as one of the most beautiful motorcycles ever created. Its sculpted bodywork, underseat exhaust, and sharp Italian flair made it an instant design classic. The follow-up models, the 996 and 998, only reinforced the myth, delivering both aesthetic delight and track dominance. Against this backdrop, any replacement faced a nearly impossible task. And that's where the tension began to build. Micro story. Picture the atmosphere at Ducati in the late 1990s. The pressure from success weighed as heavily as the thrill of victory. The 916 family had given Ducati international fame, boosting sales and brand prestige. But internally, there were concerns. Emission standards were tightening, aerodynamics could be improved, and competition from Japan was relentless. Ducati knew it couldn't coast on looks alone, even if the fans believed otherwise. The engineers needed something new, and management wanted innovation rather than nostalgia. Context digest. Motorcycle design had always balanced aesthetics with performance. But by the early 2000s, regulations and racing demands tilted the equation. Manufacturers had to consider airflow, cooling, and ergonomics in ways that sometimes clashed with traditional beauty. This reality would set the stage for the 999's unconventional appearance. Reflection bridge. The question wasn't just what Ducati would build, but whether fans would allow their expectations to be rewritten. Micro story. Enter Pierre Terblanche, a South African designer with a reputation for pushing boundaries. He had already worked under legendary figures like Massimo Tamburini, the man behind the 916. Yet Terblanche didn't want to imitate. He wanted to innovate. His sketches for the new superbike replaced the flowing lines with sharper, more industrial edges. In his view, it was form following function. To some, this was daring. To others, it was sacrilege. Inside Ducati, there was confidence in his vision. But outside, a storm was brewing. Context digest. The 999 arrived with a trellis frame, new ergonomics, and highly adjustable components, all designed to make it faster and more adaptable than its predecessors. For racers, this meant flexibility. For riders, it offered comfort tweaks rarely seen in superbikes. But all these advantages were obscured by the overwhelming first impression: its looks. Micro story. Imagine the unveiling in 2002. Crowds expecting another curvaceous masterpiece were greeted instead by something angular and mechanical. Some applauded the boldness, others gasped in disappointment. Magazines split on whether it was genius or disaster. Ducati had aimed for evolution, but the public saw revolution. And revolutions are rarely gentle. Reflection bridge. Suddenly, The Ducati community was divided not by performance or loyalty, but by identity itself. Microstory. While the design controversy dominated headlines, the bike's real strengths emerged on the track. In racing trim, the 999 was a powerhouse. With multiple World Superbike championships under its belt, it proved that Terblanche's choices had merit. Aerodynamics aided stability, ergonomics kept riders fresher, and its chassis adjustments became the envy of competitors. Yet every victory was accompanied by a caveat. Fans still questioned whether it deserved to wear Ducati's crown. Context, digest. This split between performance success and aesthetic rejection was unprecedented in Ducati's history. It wasn't that the 999 failed mechanically, it thrived. What failed was the bond between the brand's visual heritage and its audience's emotional expectations. Microstory. Owners who embraced the 999 often spoke of how it rode better than any Ducati they'd owned before. The adjustable handlebars, foot pegs, and seat allowed them to tune the bike to their bodies. Track riders loved its precision. But park it at a cafe and the comments were predictable. Why doesn't it look like the old ones? That disconnect meant the bike carried both pride and stigma at the same time. Reflection bridge. This contradiction, engineering brilliance paired with cultural resistance, would shape the next stage of Ducati's story, and the stakes would only grow higher. As Ducati pressed on, the company faced the challenge of proving that the 9999 wasn't just a curiosity, but a legitimate heir to the throne, and that battle defined its next chapter. As Ducati moved deeper into the 2000s, the question was no longer whether the 999 could perform. It clearly could. The real challenge was whether Ducati could survive the cultural rift its own design had created. Fans remained split, and the motorcycle press reflected that division. For every article praising its handling and adjustability, another lamented the loss of the sensual Italian curves that had defined the brand. It was a clash of identity, where loyalty to the Ducati name was tested against loyalty to a particular aesthetic ideal. Microstory. In the racing paddocks, the 999 was carving out its own legend. Troy Bayliss, one of Ducati's most celebrated riders, took the 9999 to multiple championships, proving that the machine was not just competitive but dominant. Each victory brought validation to the engineering team, yet outside the racetrack, conversations circled back to looks. It was as though the bike's achievements existed in a parallel universe, one respected by insiders but ignored by casual fans. Context digest. This paradox revealed something unique about Ducati. Its community valued beauty as highly as speed. Where Japanese superbikes could focus purely on function, Ducati's appeal had always been equal parts art and performance. By breaking that equilibrium, the 999 exposed how fragile the Ducati identity really was. Reflection bridge. The irony was that Ducati was doing what critics always asked for, moving forward. Not resting on nostalgia, yet that very courage became its greatest burden. Microstory. Dealers reported a strange pattern in sales. Riders who test rode the 999 often walked away, impressed by how comfortable and confidence-inspiring it felt, especially compared to the aggressive ergonomics of the 998. But many still hesitated to purchase, admitting they couldn't get past the looks. This created a curious market dynamic. Bikes that were technically brilliant sat unsold, while older models retained cult status. For Ducati, this wasn't just a design gamble. It was a financial risk. Context digest. By the mid-2000s, Ducati's leadership had to confront a difficult truth. The 999 styling had cost them market share, even as its racing pedigree remained untouchable. Competing brands were closing in with machines that were fast, aggressive, and, critically, visually appealing to a wider audience. Microstory. Inside Ducati, debates grew heated. Should the company double down on the 999's philosophy, trusting that time would vindicate it? Or should they pivot back toward the visual DNA that made the 916 so iconic? These weren't just design questions. They were existential ones. A motorcycle company that prided itself on passion couldn't afford to alienate its most passionate fans. Eventually, the decision was made to move on from the 9999 and introduce a successor that would bridge the divide. Reflection bridge. What followed was a fascinating resolution. one that revealed how a misunderstood machine could still influence the brand's direction long after it left the showroom. When Ducati unveiled the 1098 in 2007, it was hailed as a return to form, with styling that echoed the 916 lineage while incorporating lessons learned from the 999. Yet even as fans celebrated, the shadow of the 999 lingered, shaping how Ducati balanced innovation with heritage. That legacy is the heart of the story's conclusion. The story of the Honda Dream 305 doesn't end with its initial success. In many ways, that was just the beginning of a larger transformation that would ripple through the entire motorcycle industry. By proving that Japanese engineering could stand shoulder to shoulder with Western machines, the Dream paved the way for Honda to launch more ambitious models that would forever change the game. Its legacy is not only about sales figures or market penetration, but about the redefinition of what motorcycling could mean for millions of people across the globe. Microstory. When Honda unveiled the CB750 in 1969, often hailed as the world's first superbike, it was building on the credibility earned by the Dream 305. Without the Dream breaking down barriers of trust and perception, the CB750 might have been dismissed as just another foreign experiment. Instead, it was embraced as the logical next step from a company that had already delivered on its promises. This direct lineage from the Dream to the CB series demonstrates how one modest motorcycle became the seed of an entire era. Context Digest. The collapse of many British marques in the 1970s can be traced in part to the groundwork laid by the Dream. Riders who once swore allegiance to Triumph, BSA or Norton discovered through the Dream that there was another path, one of reliability, accessibility, and innovation. As Honda and its Japanese rivals expanded, those British icons struggled to adapt, weighed down by tradition and resistant to change. The Dream may not have been the hammer that ended an empire, but it was the first crack in the wall. Microstory. Beyond the motorcycle world, the Dream 305 symbolized a turning point in how American consumers viewed Japanese products in general. Radios, cameras, and cars from Japan gained credibility in parallel, but the Dream helped lead the charge by being both visible and aspirational. For a generation of Americans who grew up watching neighbors buy Hondas that simply ran and kept running, the idea of made in Japan shifted from suspicion to admiration. That cultural transformation went far beyond two wheels. Context Digest. The Dream also represented a shift in design philosophy. While many Western bikes leaned heavily into tradition, Honda's willingness to experiment with pressed steel frames and unconventional styling sent a signal that Japan was unafraid to innovate. Even though the styling of the Dream divided opinion, it demonstrated a kind of boldness that prepared the world for the radical designs to come. It trained consumers to expect that Honda would always bring something different to the table. Microstory. Collectors today often seek out the Dream 305 not just for its rarity, but for its symbolic weight. Owning one is like holding a piece of the exact moment when the balance of power and motorcycling began to shift. Stories abound of restorers who take pride in preserving the Dream as a reminder that progress in engineering is not only about horsepower, but about vision. For many, it is less a motorcycle and more a milestone. Reflection Bridge. The Dream's impact cannot be measured in isolation because its story intertwines with the broader rise of Japan as an industrial powerhouse. It was one small chapter in a much larger saga of global economic change. Context Digest. The Dream 305 also influenced how Honda approached motorsport. While the model itself was not a racing machine, the credibility it built allowed Honda to invest in competition without being dismissed as an outsider. Victories on the track by Honda's racing arm carried more weight precisely because the company already had a foothold in everyday garages. The Dream was the bridge that connected mass-market riders with cutting-edge performance. Microstory. In the decades that followed, countless riders looked back at the Dream as their first taste of motorcycling. Many of those riders later upgraded to larger Hondas, but they remembered the 305 with affection for its dependability and charm. Oral histories are filled with people recalling how the Dream introduced them to the joy of riding, without the frustration that often came with British machines of the era. That nostalgia helps explain why the Dream still holds a revered place in motorcycle culture. Microstory. Internationally, the Dream 305 gave Honda confidence to expand into markets across Europe, Asia, and beyond. What started in Los Angeles became a global movement, and the Dream was often the vanguard of that expansion. In countries where motorcycles were more necessity than hobby, the Dream's reliability became a lifeline. Its influence stretched far beyond style or status. It was a tool that empowered mobility on a massive scale. Reflection bridge. By the time production of the Dream wound down, it had already etched itself into history. The model proved that motorcycles could be both reliable and aspirational, both accessible and innovative. It had changed minds, shifted markets, and altered the trajectory of a global industry. The Honda Dream 305 remains a reminder that revolutions do not always come with fanfare or fireworks. Sometimes they arrive quietly, with pressed steel and a starter button, and they leave behind a legacy that endures for generations. The Ducati 999 story is ultimately one of courage, risk, and the unpredictable way history judges innovation. When it first arrived, it was cast as the heir to legends, yet scorned for straying too far from tradition. Critics and racers admired its precision and adjustability, but fans mourned the departure from sensual Italian curves. That tension created an unforgettable moment in Ducati's history. A lesson that passion for motorcycles is as much about identity and art as it is about speed and performance. Over time, the controversy faded and the true qualities of the 999 came into focus. Its racing victories spoke for themselves, its engineering proved timeless, and its design, once divisive, began to look prophetic in an era where sharp, angular styling became the norm. The bike that had been seen as an outsider now carries the aura of a misunderstood pioneer. For Ducati, the 999 provided invaluable insight into the balance between progress and heritage. Without it, there may have been no clear path to the Panigale or to the brand's renewed strength in blending modern performance with visual legacy. For enthusiasts, it stands as a reminder that love for motorcycles is complex, sometimes clashing between heart and head, but always fueled by passion. So as we look back at the Ducati 999 today, we see not just a motorcycle, but a bold experiment that changed how the community and the company think about risk. It may not have been adored in its time, but it reshaped the conversation and in doing so secured its place in history. Thanks for riding with us on Octane Origins. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.